The metal detectors searching for coins in a field in eastern Norway still haven't stopped beeping. Why? Because last week in a field at Rena in the county of Innlandet, metal detectorists uncovered the largest Viking-age coin hoard ever discovered in Norway. So let's have a look at the find and also try to explain the broader meaning of these treasures in the Viking Age. Over 3,000 coins. This makes the find now referred to as the Mørstad hoard after the farm where it was discovered, the largest Viking Age coin treasure ever discovered in Norway. The soil at the site contains very little stone, which may explain the exceptional condition of the coins. According to coin expert Harald Hardrada, it appears that the treasure dates from the end of the Viking Age, and it was likely buried in the ground in Innlandet sometime around 1050. Most of these finds are from the Holy Roman Empire and the British Isles, dating back to the late Viking Age, which is kind of typical throughout Northern Europe. But what makes this new treasure hoard very special is that it also contains some local coins. These Norwegian coins must have been fairly newly minted when they were buried in the ground, and we do know that it was Harald Hardrada or Hardrada who established a minting system after he returned from Byzantium, which was about 1045. Archaeologists believe the coins were once buried in the ground in a leather pouch or some sort of organic material. Apart from the coin find, they haven't really found any signs of other activity here, not yet at least. They have also managed to survey the area with ground penetrating radar, but haven't found archaeological structures in the ground. The field and surrounding area will continue to be investigated for a couple more seasons, so let's see if anything changes, as more deposits are likely to be brought to light. Unfortunately, at this point, not much else can be said about this treasure because they have to make a typological analysis of the coins. But what we can do is try to contextualize it in the broader history of Viking Age hoarding. So in Norway, research frequently highlights the Huan treasure hoard as the most significant and spectacular find, and it is considered so because it is a central brooch deposit. It was deposited near Drammen in Norway around 875, and it consists of high status female related jewelry, including a spectacular Frankish trefoil brooch as the central piece. It also contains neck rings, arm rings, pendants, beads, and suspended coins. The person who assembled the hoard appears to have specifically selected Western portrait pennies, so that would be coins depicting the bust of a king, which at the time were rare and prestigious. That is why scholars have suggested that in early 9th century Norway, that kind of coin would have been used primarily for social competition and as a status symbol. Another notable Norwegian find frequently mentioned in literature is the Mørstad hoard from Rogaland. This hoard is significant because it contains a high proportion of die-linked coins, so that would be coins struck from the same physical dice, of Knut the Great's pointed helmet type. These coins originated from mints in London, Lincoln, and Newark, and their presence in Rogaland, a region where Knud apparently recruited support for his 1028 campaign to seize Norway, suggests that they might actually be archaeological evidence of Knud's political maneuvering and bribery. So there are similar treasures in Norway. However, there also seems to be a striking disparity between the hoarding practices of Eastern and Western Scandinavia. For example, the island of Gotland definitely stands out. It has yielded over 750 hoards containing roughly 180,000 coins. So that's a lot of wealth. Western Scandinavia is, however, rich in British and Frankish coinage, but on the other hand, the Vikings who came from Norway may have been more likely to spend their wealth in the diaspora rather than bringing it home to bury it. Maybe because the slave trade in the West was already well established and didn't really require the same type of homeland based investment as the Eastern trading routes. The largest Viking Age silver hoard ever discovered in the world is the Spillings hoard discovered in Otheam parish on the island of Gotland in 1999. It is truly a massive find. It weighs approximately 67 kilograms and was found in two separate deposits, 3 meters apart, likely split shortly before being placed beneath the floorboard of a utility building. The hoard boasts an unparalleled collection of material, including some 480 bangles and bracelets, 25 finger rings, about 80 silver bars, and a vast quantity of spiral rings and hack silver. Numismatically, it contains over 14,000 coins, the majority of which were Islamic dirhams or dirham fragments. Notably, the site also yielded a third deposit consisting of more than 20 kilograms of bronze scrap metal, which leads to the interpretation of the site as a locus for intensive metalworking and trade. Beyond Spillings, the island of Gotland generally serves as the epicenter of significant silver finds, yielding more than half of all the coins ever found in Viking Age Sweden. One stems from the Runa parish, discovered in 2012, and it is a find which seems to have been the largest hoard containing Western coins ever discovered in Scandinavia. It consists of more than 6,000 coins, primarily Frankish and English, and they were deposited in a copper vessel. Another interesting find comes from Lumelunda parish, a hoard weighing about 10 kilograms and including about 3,000 coins alongside three bracelets and a significant number of silver ingots and bars, some of which were of the distinctive Slavic Russian type. We can also have some sites where several separate hoards are in close proximity. There is one in the Hull parish, and the largest contains, in this case, 1,200 coins and more than 100 pieces of silver. But the Western Viking diaspora also produced hoards that could rival the Baltic finds in terms of economic and political significance. And perhaps the best example is the Curedale hoard. This was discovered in 1840 on the banks of River Ribble in Lancashire, and it is definitely one of the most famous and massive hoards recovered from the British Isles. It contains a mixture of non-numismatic silver, meaning arm rings and ingots, also hundreds of Anglo-Viking, Carolingian, Anglo-Saxon coins, along with approximately 50 Islamic dirhams. We do have some examples from Ireland as well. The Royal Centre of Clan Holmen at Loch Ennell yielded several hoards, most notably the Dissart hoard, and the collective weight of the silver from the Loch Ennell area exceeds 50 kilograms, and it does represent a concentration of wealth paralleled by treasures such as those in Curedale and Spillings. The Dissart hoard is particularly noteworthy because it contains a parcel of Gotlandic type bullion and also early Samanid dirhams, which clearly shows how interconnected the Viking world truly was. The northern arc of trade leading to the Islamic world facilitated the deposition of enormous dirham hoards in the Slavic lands as well. Perhaps the best example would be the Dzierżyca hoard from the heart of the Piast realm in Wielkopolska. It is one of the most substantial ever found in Poland. It contains at least 18,000 highly fragmented dirhams, with the silver weighing a total of about 15 kilograms, which would have bought you at the time about 50 slaves. Another example would be the Chekhanov hoard. This is a smaller one. It weighs about 1 kilogram and 500 grams, something like that, and it includes about 3,000 fragmented dirhams. But what is interesting about it is that it also contains jewelry of Rus provenance, such as a particular type of earrings called the Volin type. We mentioned Gotland, but we should probably also mention another island, Bornholm. On Bornholm, the hoards are generally smaller than the giants on Gotland, but they're still vital to understand these regional weight economies. We have the Nørremølle hoard. This is the most coin-rich hoard on Bornholm. It contains about 1,400 objects, including about 1,000 coins and a significant Slavic jewelry component, and it weighs about 2 kilograms. And then we also have the Smedegård hoard. This is the largest silver hoard on Bornholm by weight, totaling about 4 kilograms. Although it contains only 15 coins, it is dominated by heavy silver melts, complete jewelry, and also some quite unique Christian reliquary crosses. And now comes the most interesting part, the why. What was the motivation behind the accumulation and deposition of silver? And for that, we have several interesting frameworks of interpretation, and they can be either competing or complementary. So, first of all, we should think pragmatically in the sense that a primary driver for all this hoarding was the functional requirement of a bullion based economy. This is an economy where silver served as a means of exchange, a measure of value, and also a method of saving. So many hoards can be interpreted as a sort of active deposit from which the owner could add or remove objects between trading expeditions. For example, the Gyllenskåd hoard on the island of Bornholm, found inside a dwelling house with weights and scrap silver, likely functioned as a working capital deposit for a merchant. Some hoards represent the stock of a craftsman. For example, the Nordrestensebygård was discovered near a silversmith's pit with crucibles and partially melted coins. It was almost certainly a deposit of raw material intended for future manufacture. We need to take into account that we are dealing with an age lacking formal banking institutions, so committing silver to the earth provided quite a secure repository for surplus wealth. This was particularly relevant for younger sons who, under many inheritance laws, were expected to take their scales, so to speak, to seek their fortunes through trades and occasionally through raiding, and eventually they would hoard their surplus, their proceeds that they obtained abroad. Sometimes in Gotlandic society, for example, hoarding was inextricably linked to the social fabric and the preservation of the family farm. The medieval Guttalag outlines elaborate provisions for the dowry and bride price. So, in this case, silver hoards may have functioned as unclaimed properties or pledges between families, remaining in the ground as long as a woman's father's bloodline could lay a legal claim to it. Archaeological patterns on Gotland also reveal a high density of hoards in marginal and sandy soils. This might suggest that by burying silver on newly cultivated or acquired land, an owner could symbolically and legally bond with that particular territory. Some saga instances, they mention that when burying silver, you would basically hallow a claim. In the sense that the buried treasure would act as a symbolic guardian of that boundary. Of course, we are fascinated with the ritual dimension. What did they mean beyond the profane use of silver as currency? Could it be that some of these hoards would have been committed to the earth for some sort of religious, spiritual, ontological security? And we can cite here the example of Odin's law and the afterlife. Early 20th century interpretations, in particular, really focused on this, on the Ynglinga saga. And here it is stated that the hoards were investments for the afterlife. There was such a thing as Odin's law, in the sense that a man would enjoy in Valhall whatever wealth he had buried in the earth during his lifetime. Now, there has been a disproportionate emphasis on this religious dimension. However, there might still be some truth in it, because at least some of these hoards, they seem to be non-economic. We have instances such as the Buddha god hoard, containing a deliberately bent trefoil brooch and coins converted into jewelry, deposited in an area without settlement remains, and this would seem to suggest some sort of ritual sacrifice to the gods or spirit or whomever. Similarly, small hoards deposited without containers are often interpreted as offerings as well to perhaps the guardian of a particular landscape, or as a symbolic act of land taking. In a way, the more spiritual, magical dimension may have also evolved from social practice, in the sense that silver functioned as a type of social glue where the display of hoarded wealth, sometimes even worn by the wives of chieftains or of raiders, traders, in the form of neck rings, would have demonstrated the owner's success in the whole process, whatever they did in the diaspora when they went abroad. So, starting from this, it is actually kind of logical that with the passage of time, this silver and display also gained a more ritualistic significance. And then there is also the more classical war thesis, arguing that spikes in hoard deposition correspond to periods of conflict and instability. And in this framework, silver was hidden out of fear of imminent raid or invasion. The failure to retrieve these hoards is attributed to either death or capture. For example, at the Norway site, the discovery of an iron arrowhead in a burnt house near a hoard may point to an attack that prevented the occupants from recovering the silver. So, to conclude, the Viking hoard seems to have been quite a versatile tool of agency because, as we have seen, it can represent a lot of things. It can be a merchant's capital, a family's legal security, the status of a warrior, or some sort of religious offering, which is why, in all of these cases, the archaeological context is very important. So, if you find it in a dwelling, near a workshop, in some remote wetland, it very much matters because it is an indicator of the specific intent behind these depositions. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this short insight into Viking Age treasures. Who doesn't like a good treasure? And if you did, you should definitely watch my video about a very specific hoard, bedale, where I also explain the scientific analysis of the metal and the implications. Please consider subscribing and supporting this history project with a membership as well, because you do get access to exclusive content, including courses you will not find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching or listening. This was Irina. Until next time.